Hello friend. I want to tell you about the Mercedes W203 car. In practice, under the whole mass of version designations, there are 4 petrol engines, not counting AMG, and 3 diesels. This is important in the description because the engine capacity is not as important as the type. That is why I have arranged the above lists in this way. Which petrol engine should I choose? The petrol-powered engines are the smallest M271 with a capacity of 1.8 Ls, offered since 2002, and the slightly older M111 Evo with a capacity of 2.0 L. The latter is an old unit that was still offered in the E Class, W204, and therefore, despite modernization, withdrawn quite early after the start of C Class production. The engine is relatively simple, very popular, so trouble-free when it comes to service and repairs. Unfortunately, suffering from leaks and oil leaks after purchase, it is worth taking care of this area. The successor, designated M272, always has a capacity of 1.8 L and a supercharger, and in one variant also direct injection. If only out of caution, but also because of the more expensive parts, I do not recommend this one. The other variants are good, created in the idea of downsizing, so smaller and more heavily loaded. A number of solutions enclosed in the name Twin Pulse were used. The goal was to obtain stable operation and high torque at low revs, so it had to end with problems with the timing drive. The engine does not cope well with short-distance driving, especially in winter, when it is not properly warmed up. The timing chain is particularly sensitive to this, and in such conditions, it is worth replacing it even every 80 to 120,000 kilometers. It also has similar problems with oil leaks as the M111. Problems with the throttle valve or the breather valve are also typical. In general, however, the engine is rated high due to its good characteristics, even operation, and good performance. The durability of the structure itself is very high. Replacing the timing chain is not more expensive than the belt in a typical car of this class. It is worse when it comes to replacing the entire drive with variable phase wheels. The family of larger petrol engines is also divided into older M112 and younger M272, but here the change occurred with the facelift in 2004-2005. The quality of the car was significantly improved, but more on that later. The older M112 unit was a novelty in the Mercedes offer at the time, because it had a V6 configuration, not the R6 like the earlier ones. It debuted shortly before this generation of the C Class appeared. Light and compact, and yet almost completely trouble-free with proper servicing. The engine turned out to be so durable that AMG chose it as the basic variant of the sports version of the model, and after adding a compressor, it developed power comparable to the later 5.4 Lis. By the way, the V8 used later is closely related to this design. Basically, the engine has no typical faults, but there are typical effects of many years of use and neglect. Leaks, dirt, less often a stretched timing chain. This is a great engine for long-distance driving and for cooperation with LPG. The successor, designated M272, turned out to be only slightly worse because it was based on a very successful predecessor. The main change was the addition of variable valve timing, which caused greater complexity in the timing drive, shorter durability of the components, and thus the need for more frequent intervention. A complete set costing over $750 is worth replacing when it is actually necessary. Here, a thorough verification is important. In addition, the intake system has 4 flaps that control its length and swirl, which allowed the elimination of the EGR valve, but this is also an area that can be problematic when dirty. One of the significant disadvantages of this unit is the worn gear wheel of the balance shaft, the replacement of which is extremely time-consuming and therefore expensive. This applies to units offered in 2005-2006, production, not sale, so it is worth avoiding them at all costs or checking if it has been replaced. In summary, all petrol engines can be recommended, conditionally also the M272, although it must be admitted that this is already a unit for people who can leave $750–$1,200 in the workshop without breaking the family finances. If you are looking for something more powerful, it is better to choose the M112 variant, e.g. 170 HP, instead of a comparable 4-cylinder with a compressor. By the way, the mechanical compressor, called compressor by Mercedes, is not a source of big problems or expenses, similar to ordinary turbochargers in petrol engines of that period. However, The compressor is a more complicated component and therefore slightly more prone to failures. It is also not so easy to recondition, although prices, up to $250, are similar to turbo. Which diesel engine should I choose? Each unit has common rail injection, and Mercedes was not the company that dealt with it best. However, it is difficult to talk about the quality of the injection system in our country after 2000, i.e., in a country with bad fuel and mileage even twice as high as the odometer shows. Mechanics unanimously claim that Mercedes engines are very durable, which is often confirmed by users. The OM611 and OM646 units are 4 cylinders with a capacity of 2.1 L, although there were also 2.2 L variants, but not in this model. The early OM611, until 2003, is a design derived from the previous C Class and the first Mercedes engine with common rail technology. The OM646 is a development of this engine with a thoroughly modernized head, but it is generally the same engine. The main differences are the injection pump control, fully electronic in the OM646, increased fuel injection pressure, and the appearance of balance shafts. It is difficult to talk about recurring faults, and it mainly concerns the equipment. The critical elements are the flaps in the intake system, as well as the variable geometry turbocharger actuator. It also happens that a thermostat failure causes long-term engine underheating, which is significant in the case of cars with a DPF filter. Worn-out injectors can be cheaply rebuilt, and the timing drive is virtually maintenance-free. If it needs replacing, it's worth being aware that the engine's mileage has probably exceeded 500,000 kilometers. The biggest advantage of 2.1L engines is their popularity. This also means that in case of major problems, the unit can be replaced with a used one. One more interesting fact: the 102 HP variants were intended exclusively for taxi drivers. The second diesel engine is a 5-cylinder engine, the iconic 2.7L engine, OM612. This is a unit about which you can find or hear divergent opinions. Foam-less head. Unlucky drivers struggled with a cracked head or faulty flaps in the intake manifold, as well as failures of the injection system, but the vast majority of users remembered this engine fondly. In fact, apart from the above-mentioned, the engine has no recurring significant faults. Equipment failures result from mileage and wear. The quality of the engine's operation is influenced by the oil, which should have a fairly low viscosity, even 0W30, while many units work on semi-synthetic, because that is the belief of mechanics or users. Contrary to appearances, this is already a modern unit. It should not be treated like those from Mercedes barrels. The good news is the high durability of the timing chain and the resistance of this engine to torture, provided that everything in the cooling and lubrication system works perfectly. The third diesel engine that can be found in the C Class is the 3-liter V6 OM642 unit with incomparably higher power than the others. This is the engine that gives the most driving pleasure in this car, but also potentially the greatest risk of expensive repairs. The biggest problem is the faulty injection system, and here new piezo injectors were used, which are no longer so cheap. Another weak area is the intake system. Dirt collects in the manifolds, which causes the flaps controlling the length of the channels to fail. The third weak point is the variable geometry turbocharger actuator. And as if that were not enough, the chain drive of the timing is not very durable. In summary, it is worth choosing a smaller diesel engine because it is cheaper to service and does not have such disadvantages as low cylinder head strength, although such defects usually occurred in larger cars. The difference between the R4 and the R5 is not big enough to give up the more powerful version. However, I recommend the 3-liter version only to the brave, even if the engine has low mileage. What goes wrong in the Mercedes C Class W203? The 6-speed manual gearbox is not a very successful design. Although it initially worked well, many examples develop problems with engaging and jumping out of gears after many years. The gearbox has a not very durable gear selection mechanism, which is replaced in its entirety. The 6-speed automatic is actually a manual gearbox, automated with sequential gear changes without using a clutch. The cars were marked as Sequentronic, available only in a petrol variant, fortunately rarely encountered. Buying such a model is very risky. Classic automatics with a converter had 5 or 7 gears. More gear ratios were used in transmissions paired with newer cars with M272 engines. Of course, the durability of both transmissions depends solely on regular oil changes. Properly serviced, they last a long time. Mercedes, unfortunately, did not recommend this at first, but changed its mind in younger years, which differ in the presence of a drain plug. In addition to the areas described, it is worth paying attention to the drive system. There were rear-wheel drive variants to choose from, as well as the classic 4MATIC with a transfer case, with the shaft leading out to the front axle. If you want fewer problems, look for RWD versions. They are cheaper to maintain, but in more difficult conditions, the 4MATIC works great. Unfortunately, parts for the 4MATIC are quite expensive and hard to come by, although the drive itself is durable. Another thing to look for when buying a car is the rear suspension. While replacing all the wishbones isn't a particularly big expense, note the presence of this solution in the S203 model, i.e. the C Class station wagon. An area that can be quite troublesome for users is electrics. A common fault is the lack of indicators or lights at all, as well as wipers. Error messages appear quite often, which are difficult to verify, especially in diesels. Controller failures do not allow for comfortable management of the equipment, often very rich. When inspecting the car, check all the buttons and knobs, because something you care about may not be working at the moment. Another problem, and on a large scale, is corrosion. In cars after facelift, it is slightly less, not only because of age, but also because of improved quality. The main areas that literally rot are sills, fenders, flaps, and doors, as well as chassis elements. Contrary to appearances, there are already many cars on the market that look good on the outside, but qualify for scrapping. Thanks for listening to me. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and rate my video. If you know of any problems with this car that I haven't mentioned, be sure to write about them in the comments.